There's movies you can't recommend enough, and then there's movies you just can't recommend. Today we're talking about science fiction, nudity, monsters, mythology, and history, all thanks to a silly B-horror film from the 1960s. The Brain That Wouldn't Die isn't the most well-known B-movie. You're not gonna find an ironic t-shirt at Hot Topic, but that doesn't mean it's obscure, necessarily. You can find it at any video store if you live in a town with video stores, or a decade with video stores, and you can get it on DVD. You can still find it on VHS, and it's packed into low-quality collections that piled up the walkways of Walmart. You can watch it on Amazon Prime without having to pay anything. It's on Tubi, it's on Roku, Sling, MGM+. You can watch it for free in HD on YouTube right now. Hell, if you're on Wikipedia, you can skip reading about the plot and just watch the movie in this tiny window right here. Or if none of those free or $2 options are to your liking, you can buy the movie as an out-of-print Blu-ray for $60 or $80 on eBay. Good job, Internet. Or, because it's free to download in HD all over the web, you can just print it on a 50-cent Blu-ray yourself. And even package that and sell those, because there is not and never has been a copyright for this movie. If you want to buy it on Blu-ray, hit me up. I'll sell you a copy for less than $60. Oh my god, what a deal! So yeah, you can watch it before you watch the rest of this video, but you don't have to. I'm not even recommending it. It's one of my favorite films, but I mean, it's not a good movie. It's hardly even worth watching. Remember in one of my other videos when I said, you can not like a good movie, and you can love a bad movie? Well, this is one of those for me. So since watching this movie isn't a prerequisite for watching this video, it's time for Clip Notes.
The characters!
Dr. Bill Courtner, an overly passionate surgeon who dabbles in dark sciences to advance his work. Jan Compton, a hard-working nurse and the future wife of Dr. Bill Courtner. Kurt, Dr. Bill's assistant who has a deformed experimental transplant arm. And a monster. A mysterious thing inside a closet. Doris Powell, long-departed friend of Dr. Bill whose face was scarred in a domestic abuse incident, I guess? Dr. Courtner, also a cautious and outdated surgeon who doesn't have much to do with the story. And also Bill's dad.
The plot!
After a tragic accident, an overly ambitious surgeon keeps his future wife's disembodied head alive while he searches for a replacement body, even though the disembodied head is kinda going crazy and really wants to die. Dr. Bill Courtner and his dad operate on a dying man, and just as the whole thing seems hopeless, Dr. Bill bends the rules a little bit and saves the patient through some risky science. Dr. Dad and Dr. Bill argue a bit about pushing the limits of human transplantation, but are cut off when Jan enters. Everybody says a bunch of weird-ass dialogue to convey that Jan and Bill are getting married soon. Jan briefly leaves the room while the discussion turns to Dr. Bill's continuous grave robbing that he's been doing to support his research. They blow right past that, and Jan comes back in the room and agrees to go with Dr. Bill to his secret laboratory in the mountains. On the way there, Bill's like, I don't want to waste time, hits the gas, and oh no! Car accident! Jan is decapitated, the car is ruined, and Bill is acting fast. He takes Jan's head to the secret lab where Kurt begrudgingly helps him secure Jan's head to some sciencey equipment stuff. Immediately afterwards, he tries to convince Dr. Bill to look in the cellar door at the weird, gross, icky monster they've accidentally created. Bill takes a quick look, but he ain't got time for that. He's already acting kinda weird as he heads out to find a body for Jan. He goes to the Moulin Rouge as a good place as any, I guess, and he ends up in the back room with a blonde bimbo who thinks she's just hooked herself a doctor, but it's all ruined when the brunette bimbo comes in and they start fighting. It's all very dramatic. Oh my god. Meanwhile, Jan and her undying brain wake up. Just after getting her bearings, she starts talking to the monster in the closet. It doesn't speak back, but it communicates through knocking on the door. Kurt overhears this and realizes something bad is going on. Once their semi-telepathic conversation gets to a boiling point, Kurt heads downstairs where the two experiments decide to scare him real quick. They scared him. Jan and Kurt start talking about Bill's closet monster, her decapitation, and Kurt's mutated hand. Jan realizes her connection to the monster is because Dr. Bill messed up with some science fiction-y science stuff. Kurt gets scared by all this and runs away right into Dr. Bill, who just goes to bed. The next day, Dr. Bill heads out victim hunting, finds and picks up an old acquaintance of his so that he can murder her, but then she invites a friend along. Then they coincidentally end up at a body contest, if that's a thing, so maybe this is where he'll find his victim. Then his friend reminds him of Doris, who has the actual best body ever, if that's a thing. Meanwhile, again, Jan and the monster agree that they gotta stop Bill Bill from killing someone, but he's still out there and he gets to Doris's home where she is a reclusive, defensive survivor of an accident who poses for weirdos. After some exposition about how bitter she is and showing off her scar that ruined her life, Bill promises to fix her face with new science fiction-y science stuff, so she agrees to go with him. Later that evening, Kurt comes downstairs to give some food to the monster and argues with Jan about the bad science going on. Then she gets the monster to rip Kurt's arm off, which kills him. Oh no! Then Doris and Bill show up. After assessing the situation in the basement, he drugs Doris and starts setting up to operate. But Jan keeps begging him not to do this, which quickly culminates in Jan coaxing the monster out to kill Dr. Bill, save Doris, and Jan perishes in a house fire. The end. With all that summed up, it's important to note that most people have not experienced this movie in its raw form, as I just described it. Many in the 80s heard of it for the first time when Elvira presented it on Midnight Madness.
But it's a really bad movie.
So what if it is?
Well, you heard him. You're gonna have to sit there and watch The Brain That Wouldn't Die. Doctor's orders.
There's like no commentary, and at the end she does a skit where she talks to Jan's head. Mystery Science Theater 3000 is likely how most people in the 90s heard about it. It's definitely the funniest way to watch it if you don't have any clever, funny friends of your own. And then at the end they do a skit where they talk to Jan's head. Don't watch the colorized version. It's got less than stellar automated coloring, so it's just distracting, ugly, and broken. And black and white doesn't make movies look better, but a black and white movie looks better in black and white. Now let's go into the 2020 parody remake real quick. It's essentially the exact same plot, same scene, same dialogue, but they added like 5 jokes, 2 flashbacks, and a deeply ironic ending that wasn't even funny, despite that this was supposed to be some kind of parody. It, of course, completely misses the themes and interesting facets I'm going to unpack in this video. It just makes fun of the movie, and it doesn't appreciate it on any level. And the things that they add, like flashbacks, more creature effects, and the ending, stick out because they didn't remake the film in a consistent way. It's not, what if the whole movie had better effects? What if the whole movie was a farce? The addition of a detective and scenes with Bill's dad aren't funny, but also add nothing to the narrative. And they miss opportunities for spoofing the original film that were not missed by the Mystery Science Theater guys.
Could you scratch my nose?
To me, it's a waste of potential and a waste of time to watch, and this is the only worthwhile gag.
There's no way to know what the after effects might be.
Which is then ruined by them doing it again later in the film. But this isn't a retrospective on the shitty remake, so let's move on. There's also an unrated cut called The Rare and Uncensored. I would actually like this version better because the nudity is so much more appropriate for the tone in the story, but literally it's one scene where a lady has on no clothes instead of some clothes. And before that, some drunken editor cut out a few frames here and there, maybe to meet the legal definition of an alternate cut. I don't know. It's the same movie, but with a total of 1 naked lady added to it, and not in any pivotal or plot-altering way. And then while I'm working on this, some low-budget, unknown production company is doing another remake, which looks to be still campy, but not a parody? Okay, so we've established that the Brain TWD is a big, cheap whore. I mean, it'll go anywhere, be distributed, remade, and shared by anyone, and no price is too low. And that's partly because of the absence of copyright, but also it's because the movie is not only full of complex messaging that speaks to the very depths of the human condition, it's also a full-on piece of crap. That's my thesis. This movie is profound crap. So that's where we're gonna start. Why is The Brain That Wouldn't Die such an absolute piece of trash? At first glance, it is nothing special. The acting is in the style of campy soap opera, or some instances, the acting is just like people are on screen saying lines, but no one is doing acting. The dialogue is the standard old crappy way of writing where it's more important to use proper grammar than it is to make people sound like they are speaking human words.
Then how can you make of her an experiment of horror?
And it's cheap. Clearly, didn't have lots of money. The car accident that sets the plot in motion is just a bit of shaky cam, and then the actor kind of gently rolls down the hill like an 8-year-old. Actually, 8-year-olds have more disregard for their safety than this supposed victim of a violent car accident. The makeup effects are, okay. Now you might think that the open-headed brain surgery prop doesn't look half bad, but that was just stolen from another movie called The Black Sleep.
Now I'll attempt to locate the optical motor area.
Kurt's deformed hand is just some scarring, and then he curls up his knuckles and acts like it's a horrifying mutation. It comes across as lazy and cheap. The monster is sort of that times 10, so this might be where most of the money went, was having a big, ugly, impressive monster in the final minutes, which is unfortunate because they should have invested more in, you know, the head. Make that not look like crap. She's just sitting on a cookie sheet. This really hurts the credibility and quality of the movie, because it's what it's all anchored on. And sometimes it goes from close-ups with her eyes closed to wide shots of a clearly fake head with its eyes open. This doesn't happen on a movie where people care. And I don't know if it was the director or the producer, but somebody didn't give a shit. Like, the movie was so bad that they couldn't get the lead actress back to do any dubbing or reshoots. But it's like they didn't even try.
Careful, your father's liable to report us.
Why haven't you ever taken me up here before?
At one point, you can even hear the director or somebody queuing up the actress in the recording booth.
Then we'll see who's laughing at whom. You miserable fool!
Get him!
And if you can't get your lead actress back for inserts, just replace her with a big, strong, hairy man. I'm just saying the low budget isn't cleverly bypassed. It's cheap, it looks cheap, the sets are bare, the close-ups are even more bare.
Few people see you nowadays.
Help me, I'm in another dimension!
And the effects are minimally executed. Like I said, we're going over the obvious, but this is important because some of the greatest and most beloved movies have, like, dated effects or are hindered by their low budget from the get-go. That's really not enough to ruin a film. Same can be said about dialogue. Yes, people talking like poorly trained robots is a commonality of low-budget black and white sci-fi, but it also comes up in great films of the era as well.
Suppose you were I, how would you get David out of the way?
No, you're much better at this sort of thing than I am.
No, but what would you do if you were I?
The difference here being that a good actor can make stilted dialogue work, as opposed to an actress who couldn't say a line of dialogue believably no matter how easy they make it.
I trusted a man once, all the way.
So this is kind of the irony of tearing apart a B movie from the 60s versus dissecting a modern Hollywood blockbuster. You can go from scene to scene and obliterate creative decisions back to back. It's like they have the budget, the talent, the sets, the effects to make a great movie, but then they're stuck making shallow candy corn garbage so that every decision they make is stupid. But TBT wouldn't die, there's not much holding it back. But what does hold it back is fundamental and affects the whole viewing experience. And because of that, it's easy to overlook the qualities it does have. Hell, it's not just easy to overlook, it's actually difficult to see its redeeming qualities. This isn't even a diamond in the rough, this is coal in a coal mine. I don't know, but even coal has value. So let's talk about the value. I'm not gonna beat around the bush here. The best part of this movie is Virginia Leith as the titular brain. I don't know who she is, I had to look up her name, but she deserves to have it known. And it's ironic that this campy crap is what she's known for, because she's also the face that you see on the poster at the very beginning of Stanley Kubrick's career. She plays an almost entirely mute character, so she's left to boss every scene she's in with nothing but facial expressions. But I guess he hated that movie and tried to bury it, so this is Virginia Leith's legacy now. Whatever. Maybe it was Kubrick burying her first film, maybe it was the brain, or maybe, like many things in those days, it's all Stalin's fault. As she said in a 1956 interview,
I was to have been on the cover, but Stalin chose that week to die. It was very thoughtless of him, and I don't suppose I shall ever forget.
with her modeling career and over 20 acting credits and these looks and this much talent, she is definitely one of those rabbit hole subjects. I haven't seen even half of what she's accomplished as an artist, but she is always impressive and clearly underrated. But we're going to stick to what she managed to do in this movie, the one that was so bad it made her quit acting for over a decade. She just is an actor, and while 90% of what she does so good is done with her eyes, probably one of the best examples of her talent is eyes closed, and obviously no body, when she wakes up and begs for death.
I remember fire. Burning. Let me die. Let me die.
As a head, she's got no lungs and her throat is sitting in some liquid here, and for that, she chose to do this raspy voice through the whole thing.
But last night you ran. You were afraid of what you imagined lay behind that door.
And it's not distracting or silly, even when she is delivering ridiculous melodramatic dialogue and technobabble. As an example, my favorite line in the movie, one of my favorite movie quotes ever, is so excessive and not at all how people talk, but, well, this is the moment I became a Virginia Leith fan.
Like all quantities, horror has its ultimate, and I'm that.
And when I say she works with her eyes, just look at this moment when Dr. Bill finds her alone with Kurt's dead body. And when rewatching TBT'd The Bee That Wouldn't D, what? It's shocking to see her standing up with a full head of hair, nervously pawing at her fiancé, acting more human than anyone else in the room. In this room. I'm not comparing this movie to The Room.
You've been wonderful.
I'd rather be a bride.
Okay, it's still shit dialogue, but she's handling it naturally and humanly. She doesn't stand out among the talents of all time, but in this movie, she is definitely slumming with some losers. You gotta give some credit to the guy playing Kurt, because anytime he's spouting this, like, Shakespearean-level dialogue and being super dramatic, you have to remember that he's looking at this. Another fundamental this film totally gets right is pacing. If you've seen the movie, I know you just screamed like, what? At your computer screen. Believe me, I know. Because the pacing feels wrong and slow. It's like a 12-inch sub with too much mayonnaise. It's the exact right length it should be, but what's in there ain't right. So the movie has these long, boring, long stretches of Dr. Bill walking around looking for a lady to kill. Did that rhyme? And these scenes feel like they drag. They feel like they ruin the pacing and slow the story down. But this is, again, all to do with the budget and the poor handling of the resources they had. Scenes of a sex-obsessed protagonist wandering the streets can be pretty great in a psychological thriller if there's some thought and money put into the visuals. And if you have the cash to hire, say, Tom Cruise rather than Herb, the fabulous talking plank of wood, well, you can make it work. And I say it's the budget because it isn't the script. Pacing-wise, this film is almost perfect. 1 hour, 20 minutes long. It's bookended by the inciting incident, appropriately placed at the 14-minute mark, and then the shit hits the fan right at the 1 hour mark, leaving 20 minutes for the climax to unfold. In that 54-minute window, we spend less than 10 minutes watching Bill wander around while some bad, sleazy music plays in the background. And while those transitional scenes are nothing to look at, it's literally only 2 sequences of him walking to a club and then driving through a neighborhood. And both these sequences are entirely necessary. The first is a failed attempt to get some nameless trash dancer to be his victim. The second attempt takes him on a brief little roller coaster, which ends with him finding the perfect victim. This is formulaic pacing, but formulas are such because they work. A great movie can subvert formulas, but Steven Spielberg's entire roster is made up of formula movies that are still top-tier cinema. Just saying, formula isn't automatically bad. Anyway, during his hunting, he briefly comes back to the lab a couple times, advances the relationships, further establishes the growing concerns, and Kurt is developing a relationship with Jan, who is developing a relationship with the monster. There isn't a second of screen time wasted. It's all good pacing and good relationships and good characters with compelling motivations and backstories. It just sucks because it's so poorly executed. So let's talk about science fiction. Bad science fiction is pure fiction and no science, while great sci-fi, it takes reality and heightens it to theoretical ideas, and these ideas evoke a commentary about the human condition. I'd argue that the brain is the latter. Now, I'm not going to show footage here, but scientists have successfully kept a decapitated head alive and functioning, and it's on film. Here's the animated portion of the film explaining the experiment, so you don't have to click off of my video. But in this Russian experiment, a dog's head reacts to noise, squints when flashed with bright lights, and licks its nose when dabbed with food. And all that dog has is a few tubes hooked up to it. And early on in the film, Dr. Bill says to his dad,
We can only find the key.
The key to what?
To be able to replace diseased and damaged parts of the body as easily as we replace eye corneas now.
Interestingly enough, I found this little chart that sums up the history of cornea transplants. And about the time they made this movie, cornea transplants was 20 years into its golden age. How about that? And that licking dog head was also being tested about 20 years prior. Now let's be clear. Bill is the villain in this film, dealing in dark science, and spends the entire film looking for a woman to kill. Even the car accident is his fault. I mean, even though it's an accident, it only happens because of his major character flaws. But like any good villain, there is something relatable.
Life's not fair, is it?
I'm just saying that I agree with his drive for scientific advancement. That the fact that we had a headless dog being kept alive in 1942 and still can't keep people alive that way means that as a society we decided to abandon helpful new science because society is like Bill's dad here.
Still is too risky, too uncontrolled.
You know what else was accomplished in the 1940s science world? The first digital programmable computer. Think about how much that's advanced and compare that to keeping headless people alive. Granted, the microwave was also created in the 40s, and it's over 80 years later, and microwaves still suck. The point is that the seeds of good science fiction are here. Yeah, sure, the head cookie sheet thing is kind of embarrassing, but you know what other decapitated living head was kept alive while sitting in a big tray? The Russian dog head that I'm still not showing in my video. Okay, but then they have her soaking in a bit of science water. That's kind of cool because it adds to the illusion that there isn't a hole in the table for her head to poke through if the tray can be filled with water, right? And there's tubes running into it, much like the tubes delivering the artificial blood to the Russian dog head, but still, if this liquid is what's keeping her alive, it's probably a little unsanitary to keep it exposed to the open air like that. And all of this other gear around the place, it's not so bad. Most of it is supports to keep her head level, which is, you know, that's nice for a sentient head. The paddles, the rigging, none of this was necessary to get the shot, but somebody cared enough to have this rig made and have it make some kind of sense. To me, the thing that kills it visually is the bandages. Jan spends the whole movie unraveling and saying crazy shit, but she kind of looks like when somebody in a comedy breaks all their bones and ends up in a hospital. Doing something interesting with her, like shaving her head or some tubes going directly into her skull, could have really amplified the horror. I mean, just think about what good hair has done for ladies of horror in the past. There's also this little machine with some dials. We don't know what it does, but honestly, for a sci-fi, it could use more of this. I love improvised guerrilla science in movies. It's a big part of the cyberpunk vibe, so I'm saying they could have pushed that with a few exposed machine parts or something, or more rigging filling out the background a bit. Like if we compare this to the first two Frankenstein films of the 30s, there's lots of less explicit devices surrounding the monster, but they feel purposeful and it keeps the scenery full. This looks like an unfurnished garage. So it's a science fiction horror movie, and it's pretty okay science fiction, but it's also a great big sleazy exploitation film. I'm not exaggerating when I say that two unnamed characters take center stage for a full minute just to girl wrestle on the floor, and then it ends with this really pathetic joke.
Meow.
See, it's cats. It's a cat fight. Did I say not a second was wasted in the pacing? Strike that. It's too bad because most of the sleazy, sexy lady scenes are built into the plot because Bill is looking for this replacement body. So even lingering on a body contest or sitting through a strip club backroom romance scene, it has some purpose. This is also present in the uncensored scene, which is definitely more sleazy because the actress has all her goods facing towards the audience instead of the guys paying to take her picture. And even though both versions play out with a single shot and the exact same dialogue and timing, the differences are that the nude version has her posing less, and she seems more exhausted when she shuts the whole thing down.
Baby, one more. Just one more, please. Another 5 minutes, baby.
Time's just about up anyway.
Okay. Baby, one more. Just one more, please. Another 5 minutes, baby.
Time's just about up anyway.
Okay.
There's also this little moment where, like I said, she's facing the audience the whole time, but when Bill comes in, even though she doesn't notice him, she turns away to face him. Little moments like that, with or without intention, come from the actors and crew shaping a scene on instinct, and it creates little visual relationships. If you think that's reading too much into it, look at your timeline. We got a long way to go, buddy. Now, that being said, this entire segment is preposterous. These guys are all just taking pictures from the same spot and getting, like, nothing out of it. No one would pay for this service, and if she's so ashamed of her scarred face, why would she allow for it to be photographed at all? It would make more sense if she did nude modeling for, like, an art class. It takes her out of the limelight, and she could still be, like, a retreated hermit, and no one would have photos of how totally ugly she is now. But that wouldn't be sleazy, and like I said, the sleaze in this movie is an integral part. I mean, maybe some of these guys are pros, but it really seems like this whole operation is... it's like an OnlyFans chat room where the guys get to take pictures instead of taking screenshots. Bill even refers to the men there as...
a bunch of neurotics.
So it's a tragic way for her life to have shaped up. I just blame the director for all these flaws. This has the framing for a dark, sexy thriller, but then it's like, yeah, point the canter at the actors, find the actress who can say the words. Okay, it's terrible, thrown together garbage, but the intersection of thought-provoking sci-fi and purposeful sleaze is where the movie gets its longevity from. Like I've said before, you can do a bunch of stuff right and a bunch of stuff wrong, but what really matters is, what's the point? And that's where this movie secretly shines, in my observation. I don't know how you can secretly shine, but I'm gonna let it shine. Now, I'm not saying that because I like what this movie has to say that you should just also like it. I'm simply saying there's a message here, and it's uniquely conveyed and has more complexity than people are led to notice. This is not a good movie. It is not redeemed by what it got right, but there's a reason it stands above the 5 million other B sci-fi horror movies in existence. And the real depth of this movie, as is often the case, hides behind a cellar door. The monster as metaphor is a long-standing tradition that is uniquely heavy throughout the history of cinema. Godzilla represents nuclear war. Dracula is about societal progress. The Hills Have Eyes is a metaphor about war. So what is our monster in the brain of Boodle-Labba-Da-Ba-Da? What kind of monster is he? Well, he's not a Frankenstein type, really, simply sewn together from different people. He is, through serums, experimentation, and growth, a living amalgamation of different organisms.
Before he injected the serum into that, it was but a mass of grafted tissues.
This is what we call a chimera. It's a scientific term for basically an organism made of different organisms, like Siamese twins, for example. And it's also a sad dog from Full Metal Alchemist, but in mythology, its earliest mention is in the Greek tales. Of course. The chimera of Greek mythology is often a rite of passage. Some hero has to kill the beast to prove his worth and greatness. Am I going down the rabbit hole now? Am I putting more thought into my analysis than the filmmakers put into this damn movie? Absolutely, but just because the monster is literally a science fiction chimera doesn't mean the movie has anything to do with Greek mythology. Oh my god, what is that? Okay, hear me out. At first I thought, okay, it's just a silly nod. Get a lady head statue and put it on the set, but these sets are so sparse. There's no unnecessary details. They wouldn't have added a door to the set if they didn't need to. But someone put Aphrodite's head right here in the foreground. I did my research. Yes, that's Aphrodite. Now, obviously, getting decapitated and consorting with monsters wasn't really in the Greek deity repertoire. Aphrodite was never beheaded in any story, nor did she ever get involved with a chimera. But you know who was beheaded in Greek mythology? Probably the most famous Greek beheading. Another monster who, like the chimera, needed to be conquered by a Greek hero was Medusa. She was originally a woman so beautiful that Poseidon, a god,
Try to play God.
fell in love with her.
Nothing will keep us apart.
It's uncertain whether his advances were welcomed,
I've got to save her. I've got to save her.
or if he outright attacked her.
He had no right to bring me back to this.
But thanks to all this, Medusa was reduced to a horrific monster.
Horror has its ultimate, and I'm that.
So Jan's Medusa. She's not Aphrodite. So why is there a disembodied head of Aphrodite? Well, who else gets decapitated in this movie? No one. Nobody gets decapitated other than her. But when the gods task Paris Alexandros with choosing the most beautiful goddess, much like Bill looking for the perfect body, Paris chooses our Aphrodite.
She has the second nicest body I've ever seen.
Second to you?
No, another girl, a figure model. Doris Powell.
Yeah, she's still around?
Yeah, okay, the dialogue's really bad, and even if you don't agree, in the universe of this movie, she is Aphrodite. Aphrodite, who, during the Battle of Troy, she isn't killed, but injured, and has to retreat to Olympus to recuperate, just like Doris hiding out in her skyrise apartment. The whole movie becomes far more interesting if you consider it kind of like Greek fan fiction. Like, what if Medusa and Aphrodite and the Chimera all had to interact while Poseidon or some shitty god was out causing havoc for everybody? Seriously, like, who doesn't want a Chimera-Medusa team-up? Does that even sound like English? I feel like I'm blocking more library. And that's the only way these Greek icons would ever interact, because there are no one-to-one narrative parallels between The Brain That Wouldn't Die and any Greek story. But these character parallels are undeniable. Even as unlikely as it is that anyone on set had this in mind explicitly, the very true themes of sexuality, love, and hubris are so explicit that it creates these very timeless and relatable metaphors. Because The Brain That Wouldn't Die isn't just random monsters and sexy girls. It relies on truth about the human condition, like any good science fiction. And that's why it can so easily parallel ancient mythology, the stories that have lasted for a millennia, simply by having so much truth in their metaphors.
Okay, here's my point, here's what I came to say, so here's my point and what I came to say.
The Brain That Wouldn't Die is about relationships. The battle of the sexes, yeah, but more so about how we destroy each other through love. The monster, the chimera, the secret in Bill's closet is trauma. The monster that one must overcome as a rite of passage on his way to personal growth. Now, a traumatized person can absolutely be a quality human being, because there's ways to deal with trauma and abusive people, but none of those examples are in this story. So, what's everyone's relationship to the chimera?
Horror. No normal mind can imagine. Something even more terrible than you.
Kurt doesn't like the monster. He doesn't understand the monster, he's terrified of it, but still, Kurt is also its caretaker. He feeds the monster and tries to tell Dr. Bill to stop ignoring it.
Aren't you going to have a look in the closet first? Do have a look in that closet. It's the reason why I called you up here.
But Dr. Bill, for him, this is his creation, the product of his ambition. And just like the picture of Dorian Gray, he can't even face it. He virtually pretends it doesn't exist. He keeps it a secret from his father and from Jan, his future wife. But when he can't anymore, when his idiocy nearly kills Jan, she is exposed to the thing, to Dr. Bill's secret. And as a result, she becomes Dr. Bill's new secret. So Dr. Bill has a secret lab, and he's got a buddy. Someone who is a victim of Dr. Bill's hubris.
Tear away my flesh time after time. Test after test. My hopes shattering with each grafted arm he fastened to me. Watching it wither and warp.
But still, he feeds the monster. He is terrified and in awe of Bill's creative powers.
Would you have thought possible what he's already done? He's brought you back.
Like a manipulated victim of a narcissist, Kirk looks at his own scars inflicted by his abuser and feels like he owes a debt of gratitude.
He was my only hope. I live only for the day he can work a successful transplant to my body. That is why I stay.
And when he tries to convince the abuser to face his dark side, he's ignored and then continues to feed the monster. Kurt is a true victim, but one that hasn't done the work to rise above it, and therefore he has the victim mentality. He is an enabler, literally feeding the dark side of his own abuser. This is pure codependency. Bill can't do his work without Kurt, and Kurt would leave him, but he thinks he can't.
And you stayed with him.
He's learned from his mistakes.
He has used you.
Now let's look at Doris, Aphrodite, hiding up in Mount Olympus. The very thing that disgusts Dr. Bill about his own work, the dark fucked up thing that he keeps a secret, is the same thing he uses to seduce Doris.
Today nothing's hopeless. We can graft scar and skin tissue.
That look in your eyes, I almost want to believe you.
She's a recluse. She's a victim of literal trauma in the film.
He gets his head full of jealous lies, and
You've got to forget what
How
happened.
can I forget?
And then this asshole comes along and promises her the moon.
If anyone can help you, we can. I know I can.
But it's all bullshit. He just wants to drag her to his cave and mess her up just like he's done to his woman back home.
Remember the last time I helped you? Do I look like a maniac who goes around killing girls?
I trust you with my life. Bill, you put something in my drink.
One of my favorite movies, Joy Luck Club, has this awful scene where this shitbag husband brings a prostitute home and then denigrates his wife. That's what this scene feels like to me when Dr. Bill brings Doris into the basement.
I told you I'd bring you a body.
Bill, you can't.
Yes, I can.
Jan, who we'll get to in a minute, is a smart lady. And Doris, she isn't a nurse, she's not got Jan's smarts, but she's different than the rest. Sure, they may have a past together, which makes it easier for him to convince her of something.
Long time ago, that fight. You almost tore that wise guy apart for making fun of me.
But she's a better candidate than these bimbos or this suburban lady because she is already a victim of trauma.
You shouldn't lose your trust in people. Not all of us.
And she's as beautiful as Jan was before Dr. Bill destroyed her. It's like when someone breaks up with a narcissist and they say, I'm such a catch, I'll never find someone like me again. But no, that's what these people do. They go from one amazing person to the next and destroy them, which is what Bill has already done to Jan. Center stage, right up on the cookie sheet, the brain that wouldn't die, Jan. You know how movies like to do this thing where there's an obvious actual monster, but then someone more human turns out to be the metaphorical monster? Well, they do that here, but it's not that Bill has become the monster and the monster wasn't what's in the... It's none of that. He's just a guy driven by the ambition to get the perfect woman. That's just what shitty men do. Jan is the true monster. Her and the organ mass are the monsters, the thing that must be destroyed. And like any good horror monster, she has a tragic backstory. She's about to marry a guy she respects, a man she loves, a man who she doesn't even know. And from this point on, as a victim, she doesn't exist in a bubble. She's not her own person. She is what her oppressor makes her. Like I said, even the car accident is Bill's fault. It's directly linked to his self-assuredness. And it happens, tragically, to Jan as a result of him saying, let me show you what I've been working on. Then she is reduced to nothing but a head. She is the purest example of a chick with a good personality, but no looks. I mean, she's just a brain that won't die. This is it. Much like a victim in a long-term abusive relationship, she is ruined, undesirable, and just wants to die. In Bill's eyes, she is no longer whole.
I want you as a complete woman, not part of one.
And he's the one who made her that way. Dr. Bill can't accept her without her femininity, without her womanhood and her sexiness. She's just got a good personality and Dr. Bill is an asshole. And there's this impression you get that Bill is almost relieved to be on the market again.
Bill, I want to get married. I can't stand not having you.
He wasn't even putting out lately because he's so obsessed with his work, and he's still not interested in sex.
You're all alike.
I'm not on the make for you.
But he's not merely driven by his work anymore. He's now driven to make the perfect woman. If ever there was a perfect metaphor of the objectification of women, this is it. Every woman he sees is literally an object. It exemplifies the whole cheater's dilemma and why someone like that is never going to be happy. While his relationship to Kurt and Jan is abuse-based, the B-plot is entirely predatory. The cheating husband who has the reliable woman back home, so he objectifies secondary women because they're only good for one thing in his mind.
Got to find her a body.
So as he creeps the local brothels for a replacement, he can't accept them either, because they do not have Jan's mind. Jan works with Dr. Bill as a nurse. She's intelligent. She understands medical practices.
My blood's antibodies would attack it as they attack any invading matter.
She's reliable.
Your reservations are all set. 3:30 takeoff.
And as the story goes on, we can even see that she challenges him intellectually.
You know how Bill's egotism drives him on and on.
This is important because we see him get bored with the girls at the brothel long before he gives up and walks away. So he's not just reacting to them bickering with each other. He still thinks he's doing the right thing. And when he chooses his next victim, he even refers to a her.
When she does come to, it will be your head consciously awakening for her.
As if he's making a new person, not just remaking Jan. Like a serial abuser, he is just piling up victims in his metaphorical cellar. His plan is to take his victims, using his dark, toxic traits, and make the perfect mate. Something that will never work out, but he is compelled to do nonetheless. He wants to give Jan this new body. He wants to make her a permanent victim of his trauma-fueled abuse, just like he did with Kurt. But Jan is different than Kurt. She is not an enabler. She's not scared of Bill's abusive dark side. She doesn't need a new body because she already has a new body.
Together we're both more than things. We're a power as hideous as our deformities.
The mindless mass of organs, the monster in the cellar, the trauma that Bill kept a secret this entire time. She was not only exposed to this trauma, she was destroyed by it. It's her trauma now. She even taunts and belittles the previous victim. The darkness she now shares with her abuser makes her so monstrous, she looks at other victims as weaker than she is.
Formless, sniveling fear becomes you more.
And having been robbed of her femininity through trauma, she becomes the masculine, but the absolute worst version of it. She becomes the monster she was made to be and brings a hellfire down on her abuser. And with the slightest bit of redemption, she spares Doris the full brunt of Dr. Bill's abuse. God only knows what happens to the Chimera. I assume he just withers away and dies because he doesn't have Kurt feeding him and Jan was thinking for him because she was the brain that wouldn't die. He doesn't have a brain, you see. But Jan is still entirely a monster. The trauma was Dr. Bill's ugly secret in the closet, and then it became hers. But she didn't keep it a secret. She let it out and it destroyed them both. Her darkness is so immense, the trauma she now harbors as a gift from Dr. Bill, that she ultimately overpowers and destroys her abuser and ends her own life. This is a tragedy. Or as some might say, it's like a Greek tragedy. Eh? This is why I say you can like a bad movie. The Brain That Wouldn't Die is a really, really bad movie, but it speaks to me through its characters and metaphors, because maybe it's a cheap shot, or maybe I've got a bad case of death to the author, but like I said, these are the themes that demand self-reflection. Like any tragedy, it's a cautionary tale. You don't want to end up like Jan does. She destroys herself and saves Doris, sure, but she could have saved herself too. But she knew she was supposed to die. It's the first and last line of the movie. She begs for death right before the title comes up at the beginning.
Let me die.
I told you to let me die.
And achieves it right before the title appears again at the head that would... Brain that wouldn't die? Really, holy crap, this is a bad movie.